Welcome to People I Know Show, a podcast about interesting people, personal growth, and being wrong. I'm Curt Carstensen. Joining me today on episode 14 of the podcast is Beth Benti, a newer connection of mine who, with her introspective and creative thinking, has inspired some positive changes in my thinking and perhaps can do the same for you. As has been an occasional theme with my guests, I enjoy and find useful gaining perspective from people that have had a very different upbringing than I had here in the United States. Beth was born in Ethiopia and moved to the United States at age 10 and will share some memories from her childhood. Please take a few moments to leave a rating and a review of People I Know Show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Search for and follow People I Know Show on Facebook or Instagram to see photos and other content related to the show. Now, we move forward to my conversation with Beth Benti. I welcome Beth Benti to the program. Hello, Beth.
Hi, how's it going?
It's going great. And I guess a little background on how we know each other. We don't know each other too well, but for some time, I've been volunteering in a space that you used to work in, so we cross paths occasionally, and then talk every once in a while, not too often, but the more I spoke to you, the more curious and interested I became in some of the things that you do in maybe your free time or your personal time that I find quite interesting and ambitious, maybe is another way to put it. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with you, to see if you have some ideas that you're willing to share with anyone that might come across this conversation.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So if you can, what's something you're doing now or in the last year that has been maybe the biggest step forward for you in kind of pushing yourself?
I think that working on my book project has been one of the biggest ones in regards to because whenever you're writing a book and you tend to reflect and look back and see, oh my goodness, I've come a long way. And sometimes we tend to be so harsh on ourselves because we don't give ourselves enough time to sit back and reflect. And so I would say just working on that book and mostly coming up with the topic of the book was one of the challenging areas. And so I would say it would be that.
I've never written a book. I imagine most people have not written a book. How does writing a book turn from idea in your mind to where you're at and where you hope it to go? And like, how long does that take for you?
For me, when I first thought about it, it took a while. It took me a year to actually follow up with the action plan because I'm a perfectionist. So to the extent I was like, I don't just want to put just anything. So I'm still in the process of working on it and making sure that it's the best work that I put forward. I guess when you have stories that you want to share with people and you have the passion to enrich the lives of other people based on sharing your truth, I guess that's where the motivation comes from. And so in a sense, I found it to be interesting to sit down, and the one main reason was to confront myself of some of the things that I've been through in life. The other reason was more so as like, oh, I wonder how many people are going through similar things. And can I save some people from going through the same issue by sharing my story and by being truthful? And it requires a lot of vulnerability. And do I want to share this much of myself with the rest of the world? Or whomever gets in contact with the book once it's finalized. So, there was a lot that was going through my mind, but most importantly, I just wanted to have that moment to reflect and be able to share my story and see what it could do for other people.
As you're talking about the thoughts that would come to your mind as you're thinking about writing this book, they mimicked basically what I was thinking about before starting a podcast. It's like all these things and these things that have happened to me and the people that have influenced me and these ideas that I have that I feel like are going to go to waste if I every once in a while in private conversation, tell someone something. Whereas if I can just kind of collect everything, bring it together and present it to the world, whoever might want to listen, might be interested in it. At some point, maybe I can make an impact with all these things that I've been through, because I feel like instead of wasting time on whatever I feel like I've wasted time on or learned from, if I can just tell people to maybe make the path for them a little quicker, better, healthier, stronger,
that's what I want to do. So is that now, am I repeating what you're thinking, or is it a little bit different?
Yeah, to some extent. I think that we often look into the world and say, oh, I wish I could make a difference. I wish I could help so many people. And I think too often we think about, oh, I don't have enough money, or I don't have whatever type of resources that we think we lack of. And so that hinders the process to follow up with the action plan and to follow, your thought process. And so in a sense, I just wanted to be part of that arena. There's so many great individuals out there sharing their personal stories and both personal and professional stories. And it has empowered and encouraged and motivated so many people around the world. So why not,
How long do you think before you have a book that's ready to be read by anyone in the public?
Oh, my goodness. My goal is within the next 2 years. Because like I said, it requires a lot of vulnerability. And I feel like life is a process, as the journey goes, you continue to churn the pages. And so I'm still churning pages, I guess.
And what's maybe the biggest thing you learned so far having written? What percentage of it would you guess that you've written so far?
I have half so far. And I mean, even with the first half, there's been times where, I will edit and I would go back and I would delete some, and then I would, put new information. And then it's been a very rewarding journey so far. But at the same time, it's been one of those things where I'm constantly just trying to perfect it. And like I said, being a perfectionist doesn't really help with that type of stuff. So, hopefully within the next 2 years, I'll finalize it.
And if this was the only thing you were spending your free time on, that would be one thing. But I know you've expressed some other things you're involved with or pursuing. So your time is being spread in some other places.
Oh, yeah.
What else would you say is a main recurring thought or idea or project that keeps on coming into your mind?
I would say Journey Driver, which is an Instagram platform that I'm utilizing at the current moment. And the whole purpose is to motivate, inspire, and uplift individuals, whomever comes in contact with that page. I try to share a bit of my mind, as I call it, the blueprint of the personal development. And so I guess that takes some of my time too, because you can't just post just anything, There are things that come to your mind, but to put it into perspective and to share with the rest of the world, again, that requires vulnerability, to some level of vulnerability. And so, yeah, that tends to take my time, along with, my professional life, working the 9 to 5, and also being on a bunch of committees and boards. And so, life keeps me busy.
And do you take time for yourself, away from all these projects, or are these projects?
I will say I do take time for myself. It's so critical and important to set a time aside where you unplug. What I mean by unplugging is getting rid of, cell phone, TV, whatever the case may be, and just connecting with the inner self, and reflecting. And I think that too often we don't give ourselves enough time to connect with ourselves. And there seems to be a lot of distractions, and life is going at a fast pace. And so I try to be mindful of that and make sure that I'm giving myself enough time to just relax and reflect. And, I guess I can't pour out into the world if I'm not stable myself. So I try to stabilize that and make sure I'm the best person that I could be for myself, because you offer what you have, right?
Exactly. And you can't have more than, I guess, what you've done or experienced to this point.
Yeah.
In your life. So I think back to some of our previous conversations, and I guess, and maybe this will factor into what's going into your book, or maybe Journey Driver, or maybe there's some other things that you're working on. But is there a story or two from your adult life that really pushed you in a direction to make you feel like you have these things to say, and to make you willing to be vulnerable with the world?
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's a really good question. Yeah, I feel like grieving would be one of them. Losing a sibling is very difficult. And I felt like for a very long time, there were so many things I questioned because of grieving. And so I feel like sharing that story with somebody that could possibly relate to it, not necessarily only just losing a sibling, but loss as a whole, because, God only knows how complex that could be. And so I would definitely say grieving, the process of grieving. And I think too often I hear people saying, it gets better with time, but I feel like it's a lifetime process, in my opinion, depending on how close the person is to you, what kind of impact they made in your life, and just the overall experience. So I'll definitely say grieving, the process of grieving.
Yeah, there's the times where, I guess for me, and before we recorded, we talked a little bit about my friend Josh, who was on a previous podcast, where I think of him and it's just like there's this void where for me, I guess the sadness is not as current, but there's this like he used to be there and I can't reach to him, and what do I do with that? And I'd imagine my reaction to that it's very individual, and someone else might have that thought reoccur about someone close where they react differently and maybe it ruins their day or something. And I guess we depending on how well we know somebody and how we've learned to handle those types of situations, it's going to be a greater and lesser degrees of difficult and might really impact someone's day or week, I suppose, depending on how that hits you.
Or life.
Or life, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that as the process was moving forward with the grieving process, what helped for me in particular was being able to do some of the things that my sister enjoyed. And so in a sense, the grieving part became more rewarding once I started celebrating the things that she enjoyed in life when she was alive. And she was really big into helping people and what she would say, living a rewarding life. When I was younger and she used to say that, I'm like, okay, I don't get it. What's so rewarding about life? But now I'm a lot wiser and I get what she's saying. I think just appreciating what you do on a daily basis, whether that's going to work, whether that's spending time with your friends and family, whatever the case may be, just, being present. I think at the current generation, we spend so much time on our phones. You see people in restaurants and at parks and so many different outings. And a lot of people are not even making eye contact with each other when they're communicating. Or you see various levels of relationships that are being ruined by, devices. And so in a sense, from the overall experience, so we don't have any regrets, try to be more present. So that way, even, tomorrow's not promised. So in a sense, it's good to be present and to really take in what's in front of you.
I think something important is, like, I'm one of those people that's far too often staring at my device, at my phone. But I do, at least I think I have this awareness that I do it too much. And if someone were to ever say something to me, I wouldn't be upset at them. Yes, good reminder. Thank you. Let me put this away. And I wish people would do that more often. Yeah. And I don't know if everyone's at that place where either they're very consciously not doing that, or at least are willing to admit, that's some sort of an addiction and it's not what we want most. I'm just afraid, especially even the younger generations, that it's been their entire life. Mm-hmm. They don't know another way. Like you and I probably know another way, but mm-hmm. there's a certain age, I think, where how are these people ever not going to be addicted to every device they've ever come across? I'm afraid they might not be.
Yeah, true. I think that with younger kids, it's all depending on, what's allowed in their homes. It's like if you're spending, 90% of your time on devices and just focused on technology alone, it could be for various reasons. But at the same time, just being mindful of that. And I think parents can help with that kind of stuff too. And saying, hey, let's do something. Let's have game night. And let's go out for a walk as a family. Something more where it requires them to connect with one another. Because I feel like even at restaurants, I'm like, oh, you came to the restaurant, to enjoy, to have family time or whatever the case may be. But everybody at the table has their phones out. And I know at least with my nieces and nephews, I'm always like, okay, like here comes the basket where you have to dump in your phones, and they hate it. But at the same time, we have better family time at the end of the night when phones and tablets are not out.
I've been a few places where that happens, but I really don't think it's that common, sadly. So it's a good idea to employ for anyone that's looking for a better way to have a family meal or some other type of gathering that isn't so distracted by technology.
Yeah. And to some extent too, whatever they're being exposed to via tablets or whatever type of devices that they're using, there's so much pressure, especially on the young people, and like what life should look like, or what beauty, how is beauty defined, or just various topics. And I feel like it would just suck to restrict their mind when it comes to that kind of stuff, because I feel like by interacting with other people, particularly people that love them the most, family members, friends, peer support that they may have, to connect on a deeper level, to identify those things, or to have a better understanding or definitions of what those things are, rather than the external world painting a picture for them that might not be ideal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And so, my thought process in regards to technology and all these devices out there is just, like they're great when you're using them for particular reasons, but it's like, I feel like it's a constant use. So, not to get off subject, but yeah.
Well, it's all one giant subject or something. I don't know. That it pulls, like those devices pull people into habits that, whether or not you really tried to get the habit, I think it's just that part of the habit. Like every time I see my phone, and it's like, oh, my phone, I grab it and I look at it. It's like, why did I do that? Yeah. But I feel like I said, the awareness is better. But then once you're aware of it, trying to get away from it. So I know, maybe not with relating to phones necessarily, but you've told me about some of the things that you've done or thought of to push your own boundaries with putting yourself out of your comfort zone. And you would tell me that you would do these things maybe quite frequently. And I do find that fascinating, because I think that's how we grow in life. And sometimes we're kind of forced into situations where it makes us uncomfortable, but it sounds like you're almost forcing yourself to be uncomfortable at times to make yourself grow. So do you have some examples of that?
Yeah. I think that at a very young age, particularly, coming from Ethiopia to the United States, things are completely different. I spent my first 10 years in Ethiopia and the remaining here in the U.S. And so just being able to compare the two cultures in a ways to understand why I push myself the way I do helps me understand life better, I guess, to some extent. But in regards to habits, I like what me and my best friend call it people watching. Mm-hmm. And so I could be at a coffee shop, I could be at a restaurant, whatever the case may be. And I just observe and try to see, because it's hard to critique yourself because you can't look at yourself, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're staring in the mirror.
And even that's a strange concept, because
it's like, hey, how's it going? I recognize you.
You can only see yourself in the mirror as if you're constantly staring And if you take your eyes away, then you really can't see. So it's a strange dynamic that isn't, I don't think it's like watching anybody else, because you can see them no matter what direction they're looking or what they're doing.
True. And so I feel like, in my opinion, people are the best books. That's how I look at it. I feel like you get to have various chapters every time you choose to be present. And so just being observant has helped me grow as a person. And like the whole thing in regards to the phones, I was really bad. And my sister would always say, "Oh, you're always on your phone." And I didn't even notice that I was spending this much time on my phone. And I was just like, really? I was like, oh, okay. And then I was just like, oh, let me go out to restaurant and coffee shops and see like how often people spend time on their phones. And I started noticing, I was like, this does not look pretty. And so I try to be mindful of that. And I guess anytime that I wanted to challenge myself outside of my comfort zone, I had to take into consideration what are some of the things that I don't really like I'm currently doing, and why do I want to change them? Which takes a lot of reflecting again. And so, like, for example, I used to be like a heavy coffee drinker, and I promised myself 2019, I'm going to quit coffee. So 10 days strong.
Really? So
it's been rough.
You went from how many cups in the final days of December to nothing?
From 2 to nothing.
And that was not day 1, day 2. Was that difficult for you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, my sleep patterns were all over the place, and I was just like, I don't know if I can make it. This is hard. But I was just like, you know what? It taught me more about self-discipline, and then I saw what it was, doing to my body. I'm like, it's messing with my sleep patterns. I'm like, I'm allowing this to happen to my body. Like, let me stop and hold back on this coffee journey and see how it will turn out. And so probably a good decision I've made. So 10 days, I'm going to keep pushing. Hopefully I make it.
So now everyone knows that we're recording this on January 10th. Not exactly sure when it'll first air, but...
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, maybe I'll get an update from you prior to then to see if you're still holding to it.
Yeah. And so I feel like just... I'm big on habits and surrounding myself around people who add to my life, and vice versa, who I also pour into. So I try to be mindful of the habits that I want to get rid of, and then the habits I want to enrich. So get rid of the small bad habits first, and then work my way up.
So these two things kind of tie together, but you mentioned going to a coffee shop to people watch. And when you first brought that up, when you said people watch, I was just thinking general people watching, but you would go there with the purpose of trying to see in others the things that you maybe should be more critical of yourself. And based on what you saw is what you would use. You'd use that information to maybe decide whether or not you needed to change your own behavior. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know that anyone's ever put it in that way to me before, or that anyone else even does that in such a way. Yeah.
I think that when I first come up with these things, I'm like, okay, weirdo. Like, how does this gonna work? But then, those conversations I have with myself sometimes tend to definitely challenge me outside of my comfort zone, and hold me accountable too. And it's like, well, you said you're going to do something about it, so you have to do it. So if I'm investing time into these things, I tend to hold myself more accountable. So that was part of the piece. I was like, okay, I need some type of accountability. Like, you can ask friends and things like that, but how consistent would that be? So I figured if I'm pouring so much time into this, I can't choose but to make effective changes, right?
I think it's good logic. I'm not sure everyone's able to do that the way that you say that you are, but that would be very useful, I think, for everyone. I guess I can speak for myself, for me to employ that better and better, because I know I have my faults.
Yeah. Well, life is not perfect, and the journey continues to be interesting, enriching, and challenging. So I guess one day at a time, right?
Yeah. So, but Now, can you still go to a coffee shop since you're not going to drink coffee and people watch, or will you need to go somewhere else?
I mean, there are tea shops that have great teas.
So tea's okay?
Yes. I love tea.
Just not coffee?
No coffee. And I love coffee shops because I feel like it was a huge part of my life in college. Because I don't know, for some odd reason, it's the one place that my mind is completely focused, and I come up with all these great ideas, and I'm able to be like, oh, I can only imagine what I could do with this idea. I feel like any other places don't do that for me, but coffee shops tend to do that for me. So I don't know. Maybe it's the aroma or something.
You have these different ideas, and I think just a few minutes ago you said, like, you called yourself a weirdo because you have these different ideas.
Yeah.
There must be a number of them. If you've had that experience before where you call yourself a weirdo, what else have you thought of and thought, ooh, this is a good idea, even though it makes you feel like you're a weirdo?
So I'll share a brief story. When I was probably 6 or 7, I was walking with my father in Ethiopia. I've never seen a blind person prior to this time, to this moment. And the person was using a guide stick. And I was just like, what is going on? Just a kid, didn't know better. And I tapped my father and I said, hey, what is that person doing? And I think it was such a powerful moment that I would never forget. He didn't necessarily say that person is blind. He said, oh, they're just trying to find their world. They're just trying to find their way into the world. Mm-hmm. And that always stuck with me. I think that too often when we meet what we call strangers, people, I should say, they might be cranky or they might be pleasant or whatever the experience may be, we tend to shape how we feel about the world based on these experiences. And so that particular experience taught me one of the most valuable lessons in life. I think that when people seem under a lot of pressure, I think of that comment that my father made, they're just trying to find their way into the world. And so how can we be better individuals in order to pour positive energy into the world? And us physically being in this world is part of that. I feel like that's our daily duty. Not trying to speak for everybody. I feel like that's my daily duty as a person. And so I try to be mindful of that. And I guess trying to see the good in the world, because you hear so many horrific stories and negative energies and all these unpleasant things. But I've been around so many great people who, and some of these people I don't even know personally. It's just their action towards the love that they pour into this universe is so beautiful to me. And so I try to just be still so I can soak in some of that goodness, I guess.
And as you say that, I think, are you seeing the results that you're looking for, or are you just sticking to the plan and hoping that they are there, whether or not you can even see them or know what sort of an impact maybe you're having on others?
In regards to the book that I'm working on, the title is called Unspoken Gratitude. The reason why I called it that is because there's been times where I've seen so many great things, but I haven't been able to say, hey, thank you for doing that. Or been able to acknowledge the person because I might be in my car or whatever, the opportunity didn't allow it, And so I feel like too often we see things or people will do things just out of the goodness of their heart. And they might not want to thank you. They're just doing it because that's genuinely who they are. And so that's how I came up with the book title. But I just see more good in the world than I see bad. In a sense, I feel like it's more of a mindset thing. And just in life as a whole, I don't look at things like your average person. And for the longest time, I used to be like, oh, this is weird. Like, why am I not thinking like most people?
Yeah.
And when I was younger, I used to have difficulties with it and think to myself like, oh my God, like is this like you're seeing things outside of what other people would see sometimes? And I would have conversations with my grandfather, and he was just like, "You're too bright for your age." And I would say, well, I was like, I spend a lot of time with a wise man. And so being my grandfather. And so I guess, not to jump all over the place, but does that answer your question? Or
Yeah, I think it does.
okay.
In the unspoken gratitude, that makes me think certain moments in my life, even recent ones where people thank me for things. And I suppose it's proper to thank someone for something, but I feel like this is just who I am. This is, I'm not doing it to get anyone's gratitude. I'm doing it because I feel like it's the best thing I can do in that moment, and I feel good about it, and it's the right thing to do. So it's, I think, kind of strange sometimes when people do thank you for things that I feel are just part of being a good person. So I'll accept their thank you, but I don't know that I feel anything from it. It's just because it's not the reason for doing it. I'm not doing something to get a thank you. Yeah. I'm doing something because I feel like it's the right thing to do. And I'm hopeful that by doing the right thing more often than not, as often as possible, that it somehow leads to a greater good in the world.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think even with the people who even take the time to say thank you, just shows something about them. It's a time to connect with that person and be like, oh, they were present. They acknowledged that we connected at this one particular point in life. I feel like, for example, there was one incident. I held a door open for a lady, and she had a walker, and she was using her walker, and then she was like, F you. And I was just like, oh, okay.
What?
And I guess some of my friends say I'm too patient. I was like, oh, okay. Whatever that means. But I don't take what other people say to me personal. Maybe it's because of my upbringing, and just the cultural differences. And my friend was like, what? She was like, you're just going to let her cuss you out? And I was just like, yeah. And she was like, yeah. I was like, yeah. I was just like, well, maybe this is a one time in her life she wanted to open the door herself. And I interrupted that process. And I think too often we look at things the way we understand it, and not thinking outside of the box. And so I try to be as mindful as possible in regards to that. It's like, I didn't take it personal. It's just like, yeah, like I said, maybe she wanted to open the door herself. And I just closed it back and let her try.
So in this situation, we can't know exactly what she's thinking, but it's possible that she saw you as someone opening a door, not to be just a helpful person, but seeing her as someone that was incapable of doing it herself.
Mm-hmm. But how often do we allow ourselves that kind of time to look into somebody else's world? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I think it's really critical and important to be mindful. There are a lot of people who are unable to do the daily things, and that some of us might take for granted. And so if somebody reacted that way, I could have been a bitter person and been like, F you too, but that's not who I am. So in a sense, I'm just sharing the story to kind of put it out there and to allow people to have the opportunity to think outside the box and to look at it to the best of your ability from that person's perspective or position, if I may say.
Yeah, one of my favorite things is to try to think in a new way, or find ways to think differently, or maybe to think better. Or I don't know if it's better or different. I'm not sure better is even possible. Just to engage in a thought process that might be a little more unique than maybe the average person, or what I used to do. So
yeah. I think that the best way sometimes to put these things into perspective, in my opinion, is if your life was to completely change tomorrow, how would you want the old you to treat the new you?
I'd never thought about that before. So let's do that again. One more time now.
If your life was to change tomorrow, completely, let's say, God forbid, you get into a horrible car wreck and you're unable to do the things that you normally were able to do the day before? How would you want your old self to treat the new you? Would you want everybody to do everything for you? Would you want them to trust you through the process and come over some of those challenging moments in your new life? Or, how would you want the old you to treat the new you?
It's interesting. I might have to think about that.
Yeah.
That's a good thought experiment, I suppose, is what it's called, to consider something like that. And so then you employ that idea of how you would want to treat the new you, or this version of you that maybe isn't quite as capable of doing everything you're able to do right now, as how you might treat someone else that's just in a different situation that you might feel like your advantage over.
I wouldn't say advantage over. I feel like everybody's journey is beautiful in its own way. I don't feel like I'm better than anybody. Even, like sometimes people treat you different because of positional power or whatever the case may be. I try to be the best version of myself every single day. And that is by holding myself accountable, taking personal responsibility for who I am as a person. So that way, when I'm going out into the world, so many people are watching you. That's why I find people watching so interesting. If I'm out there watching people's behavior and learning from it, I could only imagine how many people have been impacted by my actions. So I try to use that as a daily reminder to be the best person that I could be. But I'm human. I've made mistakes and I'm not perfect. And my intention is to never be perfect, because I don't think there's such. But just making sure that I'm pouring more positive energy into the universe than negative, I guess. So
that is perfect. And I think one of the opening tagline for my show, People I Know Show, is a podcast about interesting people, personal growth, and being wrong. And we'll get to the being wrong in a little bit, but I see you as someone that is living your life always trying to grow. Like your main focus is growing, doing better, just being better for yourself and more useful to the world around you, based on the stories that you told me. So I think you are kind of the epitome of personal growth, at least at this point in your life. Yeah.
I'm trying one day at a time.
And you mentioned it a couple times already that you grew up in Ethiopia, and you've mentioned, I guess, two of your family members. You just told a short story about your father and grandfather, and maybe that does play into if you feel like you're maybe different in whatever ways here in the United States, some years later, perhaps that's a part of it, and imagine it would be. Can you get into a little more detail about what it's like to be born and live your first years in Ethiopia, which I still don't know that much about it. I guess so. Here's honestly the first I ever knew about Ethiopia as an American kid growing up, small town Minnesota, when a country would be named as like one of the poor countries in the world, Ethiopia would be one of those countries that would be like to the forefront that me as a kid might have heard about. But I have no idea if that's even really that true, and you certainly would know way more than me. So I guess explain your upbringing and what part of the country and just what it was like there before we get into maybe what it's like there now.
I would say I think that when it comes to Ethiopia, a lot of the times, people might think as East Africa, one of the poorest areas, but you look at, coffee resources that comes from Ethiopia. I mean, that for all those Starbucks lovers out there, some of the great coffee you drink is from Ethiopia. So I feel like there's a lot of great resources that are going outside of the country. But at the same time, to me, I'm very grateful and fortunate to be from such an honorable place. I feel like I'm forever rich at heart because of where I come from. I'm very prideful of that. There's no denying that because it has shaped me to be a better person, and it continues to shape me to be a better person. And so, just the values that is instilled in us from a very young age, and every household is different, but as I was growing up, some of the values that was instilled in me by my grandfather and my father are something that I'll always hold on to for the rest of my life, in all aspects of my life. And so, I guess being a young girl in Ethiopia, there weren't a lot of opportunities. You know what I mean? It's male dominated in regards to the culture itself, at least when I was growing up. And it has changed a lot throughout the years. Now we have a lot of powerful and incredible women pushing and making a lot of effective changes. And so it's just exciting to see the dynamic change and shift in a positive direction. But overall, growing there, we didn't have a lot growing up. But at the same time, I feel like that's the reason I am who I am today. That's the reason why I work so hard and push so hard in order to be the best version of myself each day. I remember like our mother being here, working 2-3 jobs in order to bring us to the U.S. And I remember just all of us living in one room, and we had one big bed, and we would all sleep in that one bed.
How many is all of us?
I would say 6 of us.
Wow.
But it was one of those moments where, although we didn't have a lot of the materialistic things, we were wealthy in other ways that most people probably don't get a chance to come in contact with throughout life. And so at least that's the one takeaway I had from that experience. And so, yeah, there were tough times, but at the same time, I feel like I was able to grow as a person because I know what it feels like not to have much. And I know when the possibilities present themselves in regards to having endless success, I definitely am not going to be shy to grab at those opportunities. So I'm at a place, coming to the U.S. was a huge life changer, being able to have endless educational resources and be able to go through. But, when I came to the U.S., a lot of things were different in comparisons to how Ethiopia was. You come here, you have to learn the language, and just the energy and the atmosphere is so different. There are people, walking down the street, you saw so many people, even if they were strangers, they will hug and greet you and wish you to have a great day or whatever the case may be. And if you're having a bad day, somebody, made it even better. And so just that overall experience, I think like my first several months, I missed home a lot and I was homesick because I missed the nurturing and the loving part of of Ethiopia. Mm-hmm. Whereas here, everybody's so fast paced and constantly moving. And I was like, don't they get tired? Don't they pause? Don't they talk to each other? But I think that also Minnesota is one of those states in the U.S. where they're friendly to some extent. But it was definitely a challenge for sure. And I used to play these silly games with my classmates, and I would tell them these false stories about Africa. And the exchange was that they would teach me, 3 to 4 words per person a day, and I would tell them these stories.
Wait, so they thought you were telling them true stories, but you were not?
No. I figure if I prolonged the stories, then I would learn English quicker, which happened to work in my best interest. Because a lot of these awesome kids at that time thought Africa was a place where we lived on trees and they didn't know how we got down from the trees. And so I used to be like, oh, we use the tree elevator. And they'd be like, what? What does that look like? Oh, wow. And so I tried to build their imagination. And it was also a cool experience for me as a kid. I was only 10 years old, but I was just like, oh, this could be really beneficial. I could build their imagination of what they think East Africa looks like, Ethiopia to be exact. And they could teach me English. So in a sense. It worked out, but I did tell them the truth at the end.
Eventually, okay.
Yes, eventually I did. And it was a lot of, oh my God, I can't believe you. So that's not true. They don't use a tree elevator. How do they get down? I was like, we do not live on trees, people. We have houses. We have backyards. We have everything. We have toilets and all that stuff. And so they were like, yeah. And I was like, yeah. I was like, you should take a visit there with your family. So I think, if anything, it intrigued their mind to want to physically go there themselves to see it for themselves.
So at that time, you said 10 years old, was what city did you move to then? Was it in Minneapolis or St. Paul?
Minneapolis, Riverside area. We lived exactly directly across the street from the Riverside Park. And I was so happy because I'm a huge soccer fan, and where I come from, soccer is like food. And so I was just excited because the pressure was on, and learning, a new language is very difficult, and trying to make new friends, and when you are unable to communicate effectively is very difficult. But I was very fortunate. There was a lot of good people around, and just I would go to the park across the street and just relieve all my stress on the soccer field, which was very helpful and a positive way to do so.
And you were better than the other kids?
Well, it was mostly boys, and so they're like, "Oh, she's a girl, she can't play." And then I'll start playing, and they're like, "Oh, she could definitely play." And so I was just like, "Yeah," I was just like, "Don't ever make those judgments about us ladies." And so that was a cool experience. I'll look back and just reflect on that. But yeah.
The way you tell the story of the kids asking you these questions and you giving them these not quite true answers makes it seem to me like Minneapolis, really that part of Minneapolis at the time, wasn't very multicultural. Like you stood out to them and had all these stories, or at least you could come up with these stories that they'd believe because there was no other kid from maybe your part of the world that was in school.
Yeah. And if there were some, their parents might have been from Ethiopia, but they were born and raised here in Minnesota. So there was a bit of a disconnection there. And so when I first got to the elementary school I was at that moment, it was interesting to just sit in the classroom. And it was funny because we would have spelling tests and other tests that we would take, and we would sit in a big circle, and they would always put me in the middle because they want to ask me these questions. And I was like, okay, all these kids staring at me. I couldn't speak English to save my life.
Oh, wow.
And so it was a lot of, it was just interesting to say the least. So
how long did it take? How many years before you felt comfortable, or maybe felt like you were an American or as close to being one as you would get to? How long does that take?
Ooh. I don't think the intention was to ever be... I
guess you feel like you've assimilated to being just like the rest of the kids.
A year and a half, I would say. But there's so much more that comes with this experience in regards to, moving from one side of the world to the United States. I felt like Minnesota is a bit more generous than other states in regards to how open some people are. And I was very grateful for my awesome teacher at the time who, God bless her soul, she is just a beautiful person. I felt like it's teachers like her that make a positive impact in the educational world or system. And so she worked really hard with me, and the lady at the library, I tell her, like, hey, I'll stock books for you if you let me rent out more than I'm supposed to rent out. And she was like, what? And I was like, yeah. And so I had to go stock books for her, and I was really good at that, I guess. And she was just like, yeah, you can rent out as many books as you want. And so that kind of helped the process, because I would hear people say words and I wouldn't understand them. And I was just like, okay, like I could either go look in the dictionary, or I could pick up other books that will enrich my vocabulary or choice of vocabulary, I guess, and go from there. But the process in itself was very long. I think that the English language is really unique to itself. Like any languages, I think languages are just beautiful as a whole. But yeah, it was definitely a roller coaster.
And you've been back to Ethiopia sometimes or a few times since moving here, correct?
Only once.
One time, okay.
The one time that I went for volunteering purposes. It was to enrich the quality of lives the girls have in small villages. And that was really awesome. I'm super grateful. That was my first opportunity to go back and to see all these young girls who didn't have the type of opportunities I've had just because I moved to the U.S. But, you know, how hard they work in order to stay in college or to stay in high school. And the cost of living is not very cheap. And in a lot of the smaller villages, these young girls are in arranged marriages. And so there's so many complex issues with that. And so to be able to go there and volunteer my time and the resources that I have, that was like, I don't know, that was one of the best trips probably I've had in a while.
What did you find just interacting with them? Do you recall some of the interactions, the communications? Like what would they want to know about you, and what could you share with them that you thought would be most useful?
I think that people think coming to America automatically qualifies you to be successful off the bat. And I was just like, it doesn't work like that. You know, you have to put in a lot of work and effort. And so just being realistic with them and having that realistic conversation and letting them know, like, it's not where you're at, it's how much you push and how much dedication you put into something that determines your success. And so just having that conversation was really neat. But, you know, these girls barely had anything, and some of them were academically like super driven. You know, the amount of motivation that they have was just extremely impressive and inspiring and motivational. And so when you have the opportunity to get exposed to something like that, whereas I feel like here in the US, like especially my generation, I feel like we have a lot of resources at the tip of our fingers. So if we want to be successful, it's a matter of how we approach success. Obviously, success would never approach you. You have to approach it, in my opinion. And yeah, but they don't have the resources that we have here, but yet they are so driven to get up every day, regardless of the circumstances that are weighing them down in life. They are able to just conquer and become the best that they can be. And having that attitude is so powerful in life.
Was this, how many years ago was this? Or how recent?
I want to say it's been 8 years.
Okay.
9 years.
So at that time, did you see in them yourself as a child?
Yes, I thought about what my life would have been if I stayed in Ethiopia, and whether if I would have that same motivation, because it is difficult, you know, when you don't have much as far as, you know, everything costs. So I could only imagine how difficult it is for the average person to put themselves through college here in the U.S., where, you know, you're able to go out and get a job and things like that. Whereas there, the resources are so limited, at least at the time when I was growing up, they were so limited. So, it just kind of brought me back and like, well, you've come a long way. But at the same time, I guess that's a huge part of my motivation throughout life. Just having that exposure and that opportunity to speak to these amazing young women and to see life throwing all these challenges at them, but yet they get up and they have the most beautiful smiles in the morning and greetings, and they're so positive and uplifting, but yet they are faced with some of the most challenging things that most people won't experience in their mid-20s. And they're not even, 18.
Have you thought about if and when the next time you go back to Ethiopia, and let's say you take someone like me or someone else that hasn't been there, what would you show somebody? Where would you take someone to really get a sense of your home country?
My thing is, I would encourage when people travel, and if I was to ever take somebody back, I wouldn't encourage them to stay in a fancy hotel. You can find families that will rent a room or something to you and really get soaked in the richness of the culture itself. I feel like the people are beautiful. The cultural roots are beautiful. And so if you want to have a genuine cultural experience of Ethiopia, you definitely would have to step outside of your comfort zone. And so I would take people there, and I will encourage them not to stay at fancy hotels, because if that's the case, you might as well just stay in your nice houses or apartments or whatever it
just
may be.
Never leave your home.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And so I would just encourage people to step outside of their comfort zone and to completely try something they never thought they would. If you're traveling, you're there to get to know the people of that culture or that country, and what their day-to-day life looks like, I feel like that's the definition of the traveling wealth, in my opinion.
And I think you've told me either you've done it a few times or intend on it soon when you travel to take that same approach no matter where you go. So
especially if it's outside of the U.S., that would always be my ultimate goal.
So have you done that in a different random country?
I have not yet, because I haven't really been outside of the U.S. too much. But within the next several years, my goal is to get at least one place per year, because I feel like you gain the type of wealth that money can't buy by traveling. I guess you pay for your ticket and your wherever you're going to stay and whatnot, but the experience that you gain is priceless. The people you get to meet is priceless. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to some of those opportunities.
And I know you've mentioned to me that maybe you would do this by yourself. And even if you don't, there's other things that you have, or you currently do put yourself out there by doing things alone. What's an example or two of putting yourself out in an uncomfortable situation by yourself?
I've been to the bar by myself. I've been to the movies by myself, which I never thought I would do. I'm like, that's insane. But it's always interesting. They're like, oh, this person is sitting by themselves. And it's like, yeah, hey, how's it going? But the bar was the most nerve-wracking, because normally, you go with a group of friends or something like that. And so the reason why I did that is because I knew down the road I was planning on possibly traveling around the world by myself. So I was just like, if I can't make it at a bar in the U.S., I can't make it anywhere else.
Yeah,
because you meet the most interesting people at the bar, in my opinion, depending on where you go, I guess. And so I try to go to a bar where it's going to completely throw me off and challenge me to step outside of my comfort zone. And yeah, it was very challenging. But after like 25 minutes into it, I was just like, oh, this isn't as bad as I thought it would be.
So you would approach people, or do people approach you, or nothing?
Both. You make new friends, and you don't have to worry about where you end up. You know what I mean? Like normally if you're with friends, you have to go with the plan.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're by yourself, like you're able to just explore and do whatever you want. If you want to dance, you dance. If you want to have some cocktails, you have some cocktails. If you don't, you don't, Just overall, it's just a really unique experience to just be out there on your own.
And that's something that I used to not be good at, but as an example of the cruise I was on recently, and I think it was episode 10 with Brad, we talked about it a little bit, but on this cruise, it wasn't necessarily a goal going into it, but I met so many people, and I was the person going out and saying hello and learning their name and where they're from. And some of these people I'm still connected to, and I think probably a few of them I'll see again somewhere because we've exchanged contact information or Facebook or whatever else. And it's those types of connections. Without connecting to new people, there's there's experiences that cannot exist for you, ones that otherwise would exist if those events happen, that just, they will never be there.
Yeah.
And I found that it does take that every once in a while to start talking to someone in a situation where maybe your habit would tell you not to. You just kind of do your own thing. Mm-hmm. But I find it pretty valuable. So yes, I definitely encourage others to try to expand beyond what they normally do in those settings where so let's go back a little bit. You were talking about walking down the road. In Ethiopia, people were very outgoing and welcoming, and they'd interact with you. But in the United States, most places,
everybody's was like so busy and moving at a fast pace, and I feel like we don't get a lot of opportunities to be still, if you know what I mean. To be fully present, there's always something, or whether it's a device or somebody else, or I don't feel like we get enough opportunities to just pause and just, soak in all the energy around us, hopefully all the positive energy, and then learn from the negative energy too, when not to be. But I feel like the whole experience with exploring things on your own, it has taught me that the value of relationships in all aspects of life, whether that's romantic or personal, professional, or whatever the case may be. I think that too often when people come into our lives, we're always so curious to be like, I wonder why this person is in my life. And then when they leave, there's that disappointment. Of course, it's natural to have some level of disappointment, but at the same time, instead of dwelling on the negative aspect of that experience, I think it's very important to look inward and know that these individuals came into your life for a particular reason. Some of the bad individuals who have, come into our lives have I'll speak for myself. Like some of the individuals that I no longer have in my life have taught me the most valuable lessons, like what type of people I want in my life and what type of people I don't. Mm-hmm. That goes for friendships, romantic relationships, professional and personal relationships. And so I think that just giving myself enough time to have this alone time has allowed me to grow at a faster rate than if I didn't allow myself to step outside of my comfort zone to that extent, if that makes sense.
It does. I don't take the perspective that everything happens for a reason, at least not in those words, but I do think everything that happens, we can certainly take a reason from it.
And I'm saying everything happens for a reason in regards to, I'm not talking about like tragic experiences that take place in our lives. I don't think there's ever a way to justify whatever that tragic experience may be. But I feel like we cross paths with certain people. If you really pause and pay attention to the last 10 people you interacted with within the last 10 days, mm-hmm. I think our perception would shift. Because we're allowing ourselves to sit back and reflect and be like, okay, I had an interaction with this person at the grocery store, a complete stranger, and they said something to me and it stuck with me. I wonder why that is. And you relate it to either past experiences or whatever the case may be. And you get the opportunity to connect with yourself on a deeper level, but at the same time to be able to acknowledge somebody. And so in a sense, I just feel like if there's 31 days in a particular month and we spend half of that time, like 15 days out of that month, giving ourselves the time to be present, and then the remaining to just be like, oh, whatever, like we'll just do our daily routines and not pay attention, not fully be present, you would know the difference between the 15 days.
Now you might have lost me.
Okay. So in a month, if you designated the 15 days to kind of hold yourself completely accountable to be present in everything that you do. So whether when you're at work, when you're in your Uber, Lyft, or whatever the case may be, if you're fully present than you normally would be, how would those 15 days be different than the remaining that you weren't present?
I would be engaging with people a lot more often. Because when I'm not present, I'm caught in thought or distracted by a device or a screen. That for me, that's I don't know if that's a rhetorical question or not, but that I found those moments where I've maybe read some books that have had me really be focusing on being present. And when I'm especially thinking about that, the thought enters, and then immediately it's like, okay, present. And then I begin to interact with the people around me way more. And I find it much more valuable, but sometimes it's difficult to stay present. So the way you're saying it, I'm not saying you make it sound easy, but it can be quite the challenge, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. But I feel like the initial challenge starts with the person who's willing to take that accountability piece. You know, if I'm holding myself accountable to be present, then I'm more likely to be present. But if I'm not holding myself accountable to be present, then I'm not going to be. So in a sense, it's just to kind of maybe, I don't know, for the listeners, to have the opportunity to kind of pause and be still and present and see how things would change in your life and the way you interact with the people that are the closest to you or even strangers. I mean, daily habits and routines are critical, you know, they really could shift our life in so many different ways, both either in a negative or positive. It's just, but we are completely in charge of that. And I don't think we know the individual power that we have within ourselves at times because we're always moving at fast pace.
When you talk about being present, I feel like I've had some learning and knowledge with this and some experience, but there was a certain point a few years ago where I'd never even considered it. Mm-hmm. So if someone really has never considered being present or what it takes to be present for you, what have you learned about if you want to keep yourself accountable to that, what tools do you have in your old toolbox to make sure you're able to do it?
I think that I'll go back to the whole grieving process. When during that time, I was thinking to myself, like, oh my God, like this is going to be a very difficult and the most challenging moment in my life. And how am I going to be able to overcome this? Or will I ever overcome this? And the interesting part about it is the moment I realized to be present in the memories that I had with my sister, things started to shift. And the grieving process seemed to be more rewarding in a sense where I was just like, you know, God could have placed her with any other family, but he chose ours for the time that she had on this earth. And I started having more gratitude towards the grieving process. And I thought back to myself, was I fully present with her? That was the first question I asked myself. And I couldn't answer that, but I was a kid, you know, I was 10 years old when I was having this conversation with myself. And so as I got into my teenage years, I started looking into that more in depth. I have always been extremely selective in regards to how I choose to have people in my life or what kind of people I would allow into my energy or my space. Because my goal is, when I look back at my life, I want to know that I tried my best every day. And I want to know that I was present. And I want to know that anybody and everybody I came in contact with, at least I poured something good into them. At least I'd like to hope so. And so being present to me is huge. Have I always been that way? Absolutely not. But because of those experiences, particularly asking myself that at the age of 10, saying that, was I fully present with my sister, and not knowing the answer is what kind of led to the overall importance of being present, because I don't ever want to regret not being present or spending enough time or loving the people that mean the most to me. So, yeah, that's what that comes from.
And I think it's these moments of sadness and grief, or these more than a moment, that kind of shift us or can shift us as people. And we're all going to experience something or some things like that to certain degrees. And the fact that you had maybe, if not the most powerful or traumatic experience of your life at 10 years old, or one of them, I think it must have set you on a path at an earlier age than the first time I would have had something even comparable to that was probably much older. And I know I have one friend, I can't even think of who it is right now, who's told me they still haven't had like anything like that. And it's like, well, we all have these things at different times and it's how we react, but how we react is more of what we learn from it and how we'll almost inevitably use that in our life going forward. And it sounds like that's been a pretty big thing for you. Just overcoming that and reacting to it and using that as a reminder of how to live your life still today.
Yeah. And I think, too, it's important to celebrate those people, whether we have had the opportunity. I know loss varies, and it comes in different forms. And so, like you talk about individuals who are excited to bring a newborn into the world or who might not fully have that opportunity. And so grieving is not only challenging, in my opinion, based on knowing these individuals who fully have existed in our world, but even those, that we haven't met, that's huge. It affects somebody's life in such a huge way. And so even, taking that into consideration is critical, in my opinion, if that makes sense. But I feel like it is a huge part of my life, and it's something that I worked on and continue to work on. Yeah. I mean, I can imagine, and everybody grieves differently, but I just chose to celebrate her instead of grieving in a negative way, if that makes sense. So for me, it just made more sense to celebrate her by doing the things that she loved, or I guess by keeping her love alive, if that makes sense. Like, it makes sense to me. I don't know.
That's all that matters. Although I guess if we're talking to an audience, then maybe making sure it makes sense to them helps helpful too. But I think it does.
Yeah. And so keeping her love alive was the best way for me to kind of overcome some of the challenges that came with this grieving process. So, yeah, I'm just really grateful for the time that she had on this earth. It was with our family.
Well, Beth, I have one final segment or question I want to offer you, as I do each episode of People I Know Show podcast, is the being wrong segment. Is there something that you can look back on your life now that you can tell your former self that you were wrong?
I think that when it comes to the people that love us the most, there were times where maybe I wasn't in the best phase or human season of my life. And so maybe I wasn't as pleasant as I am now, or could have been. And so, and I think I pushed a lot of good people away because of that. And now that I look back on it, I'm like, man, I wish I would have done things differently. I wish I would have had a different way to, converse with them and change that experience. But at the same time, I guess you can't go backward, but just using experiences like that to be a better person. And if I learned something impactful in regards to that experience, or similar experiences in regards to being wrong, is that I felt like when we're so mad at somebody, we focus on that one particular experience rather than all the good that they have done. And so there's this saying, it's called ubuntu, and I think in certain part of Africa where they bring one person who might have made a really bad mistake and they put them in a circle. They put the person in a circle and everybody shouts something that they're really good at. And it's so overwhelming because everybody's like telling you all the great qualities that you have instead of the bad ones.
Yeah.
And you could see the person, and I have this in my office, and the person is just standing there with his hand over his heart. And you could tell like he's crying and whatnot. And I thought to myself, oh my God, like what if, I paid attention to the good that people have done instead of just that one bad thing that made me really mad about that person. How would that relationship change? So when I think in regards to being wrong, that's what comes to mind.
That is valuable. I know that my perspectives on being as hard on myself or on others has definitely changed, and even just recent weeks and months. As I guess if someone hasn't listened to some previous podcasts, my perspective on free will, or as I call it now, the illusion of free will, has changed my perspective on if someone does something wrong or I do something I wish I would have done better. To me, it's so much easier just to let it go, because I know in that moment in time, that's all that would have happened based on the circumstances, is at least my approach to it. And I find forgiving myself and forgiving others so much easier in just trying to have a positive outlook and positive communication that hopefully in the future would lead to a different action that might happen or a different result. But to be stuck on a thought of the past that's negative is just not useful in any way. So that's been my recent tool to just kind of let it go, move forward, and be positive. And I find whatever tool that you might use or whoever might use, I think is so valuable. Not to get stuck on there's reasons to be angry at someone or something. It's just so unlikely to be useful long term. Maybe in a few brief moments you get some energy out of it, but
yeah. I mean, even if you think about it, think back in a time where you were unhappy with somebody. If you were to sit there for like 5 to 10 minutes and say, okay, has this person have done more bad than good? And if the good outweighs the bad, then there you go. You have to learn to compromise and have a realistic conversation with that person. And then also assess the situation better. I think too often when we're emotionally invested, regardless of the type of relationship it is, we tend to make emotional decisions because at that exact moment, we might not be our best emotional self with it.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the times whenever I get mad at somebody or I'm in the midst of getting mad at somebody, and it takes a lot for me to be mad at somebody. And so I think about the whole Ubuntu experience. And I think if I was to put this person in a beautiful big circle and start shouting all the great qualities that they have, would I still be mad at them? And the answer is no. And so that automatically helps me kind of go into the conversation with a positive mindset, making the outcome a lot positive than if I was going into the conversation with a negative mindset.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Beth Benti, thank you for sharing your introspective mind and perspective with me today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been an honor.
Thanks for listening to People I Know Show. I did confirm with Beth that it has been 17 days and counting with no coffee at the time of release of this episode. Click the link in the show notes or simply search for Journey Driver on Instagram to follow Beth's motivational Instagram account. Links are also in the show notes for People I Know Show's Facebook and Instagram pages. Please take a few moments to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. If you like the show, please encourage someone new to listen or share this or your favorite episode on social media. And feel free to email your feedback directly to me, Curt Carstensen, by using the email address peopleiknowshow@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.